Well, hello, everyone. Wonderful to see many people joining, and I'm sure we'll have more, but it's 7 o'clock on the button where I am. So I'd like to say hello to everyone to our webinar today, this evening, whatever time zone you may be in, what every administrator needs to know about the science of reading. And we are recording this webinar, so you will get a copy of that webinar, this webinar. And please put any questions in the chat box. We will be monitoring those, and hopefully we'll be able to have some time at the end to address whatever questions you might have tonight. I also encourage you to sign up for upcoming free webinars, and details will follow. And I also want to remind you that we have done 5 of these webinars, and they're all available on our website. We encourage you to go there and check them out, along with lots of other useful information about literacy. So I'd like to introduce myself. I am Margie Gillis, president of Literacy How. Literacy How was established in 2009 as a nonprofit organization. And I have had the pleasure of working with Wendy North. Wonderful Wendy has been by my side for almost all of the 21 years that I've been doing this great work. She's one of about 10 mentors, and I'm very, very happy she's joining us today. And she'll tell more about herself when she comes on to do her part very soon. Literacy How is really focused on providing what we consider a civil right, that is to teach every child to read, because literacy is the key to opportunity. Children are at the heart of all we do because, again, we believe this is a civil right, and research tells us convincingly that 95% of children can be taught to read. It is the teacher that teaches the child, not the program. Certainly programs do matter, but it really is the knowledgeable teacher. And tonight we're going to focus on the knowledgeable and supportive administrator that will make a difference to empower teachers. We're going to cover 5 things. So we're going to talk fast and do a lot of, just sort of, don't want to say a deep dive, but cover a lot of territory. First, we want to provide a quick rationale for having a basic understanding of what is the science of reading. Next, I'm going to talk a bit about the comprehensive reading instruction, the components that comprise that, using our Literacy How reading wheel as a visual. And then I'm going to turn it over to Wendy to talk about oral language and why oral language is at the core of that reading wheel. She will discuss the use of a specific protocol that we have been working on over the years as a walkthrough tool, and she'll talk about how that's used and use some videos to illustrate that. And last but not least, sharing just a little bit about advice that you administrators would, I think, benefit from, how we support teachers with this information. So I'm going to start with talking a little bit about the science of reading. And I usually think about Simon Sinek's golden circle. We always start with the why, and then we talk about the what and the how. So the why of the science of reading is that, and you've, I'm sure, heard a lot about it. There's a lot of buzz going on around about the science of reading. Why is it so important? Well, if you think about the fact that our country is becoming increasingly diverse in terms of its learners, many more English language learners than there were certainly when I was growing up, certainly many children who are identified, many are unidentified with learning disabilities. Quite a few of those children also have attention problems. Now, in the last 18-20 months, we have another factor, and that is COVID. We know COVID has absolutely negatively impacted many children, especially children from disadvantage. And I don't usually read my slides, but I think this quote is worth reading. Children learn when they are supported with high expectations, quality teaching, and deep engagement, and made to feel that they are entitled to good schooling. The richer those opportunities, the greater the learning. When those opportunities are denied or diminished, lower achievement is the dire and foreseeable result. And when I was preparing for this presentation, I thought about a paper that I read many years ago by Dr. Keith Stanovich, a renowned researcher, a seminal paper, and I'll try to put it in the chat box in a bit, called The Matthew Effects in Reading, Some Consequences of Individual Differences in the Acquisition of Literacy. And his whole hypothesis was, again, called the Matthew effect, based on the gospel according to Matthew, that the rich get richer, the poor get poorer. And we can see that. We see it every day, depending on where we live and the children that we interact with. And people of means get help for their children because they can. And people who don't have means and access have a hard time doing that. So it is our obligation, it is our moral obligation as educators to ensure that every child, particularly children who have been adversely affected by their circumstances, get the very best education, including learning how to read. And this is just a slide from the NAEP long-term test trend results that really just show a visual of how our demographics have changed so drastically from 1978 to 2020. So what is the science of reading? This definition actually comes from the Reading League. If you don't know about the Reading League or haven't joined, I highly recommend. It's free to join. And I think this definition is, or this description is good. It's a body of scientifically based research about reading and issues related to reading and writing. And the thing that's important to remember here is that this research is not new. This research has been around for decades, and we just haven't really taken the research seriously. And so those of us who are really adamant about getting the job done really look to the research as a guide. And what has it informed us about? Well, we know how proficient reading and writing develop. We know why some children have difficulty learning to read and write. We know how to effectively assess and teach. And we also know, and this is so important, that we can prevent and remediate reading difficulties. So why aren't we doing that? That's the question. We also know how children learn to read. And this is another piece of the puzzle, if you will. The answer is the same for all children. Reading depends on spoken language. And why is that important? Well, let me read a quote from Marianne Wolf that says, each new reader comes to reading with a fresh brain, one that is programmed to speak, see, and think, but not to read. Reading requires the brain to rearrange its parts to learn something new. And that's something we have to keep reminding ourselves. We don't come wired to read, we come wired to speak. And we use our spoken language and leverage it to learn to read and write. The emphasis of instruction is going to differ depending on where the child is in the developmental progression. And by that, I mean Jean Shaw's stages, Linnea Aries' phases help guide us because we want to make sure we're focusing on where that student is in that progression. And it's also going to depend, instruction will also depend on the strengths and weaknesses of the individual child. And that requires us to be diagnostic in our assessment and prescriptive in our teaching. So where did you, the administrator, come into this? Well, administrators, you know this, but I will say this loudly and clearly because we see it every day. Teachers have very little autonomy. They don't get to choose what they're going to use to teach unless they're confident enough to close the door if they're given something that is not based on the science and pull that whatever it is out of their closet, out of their drawer, and use it because they know it works. But by and large, teachers will not do that. Teachers are going to do what you ask them to do, and they don't have the choice, right? They also don't get to choose who's in their classroom, how many students there are, how much time they get with the kids in teaching these very important foundational skills. They don't have a choice about what support they receive. So you, the administrator, hold the cards, and we're asking you, we're imploring you to make sure that you are the very best support for the teachers that you can be. And a lot of that has to do with the what of the science. What do you know about the science of reading? Now, this is a short list. I mentioned the stages, of reading and spelling development. Assessment is absolutely critical to this delivery system. We have to know what the kids are struggling with. We also believe so strongly that you, the administrator, need to appreciate the structure of the English language, because our language happens to be a fairly difficult, complex language to learn. And we need you, the administrator, to have an understanding of that. You don't have to know all the nitty-gritty details. The teachers need to know that, but you have to have an appreciation for that. You also, and this is what we're going to focus on tonight, you have to realize how important oral language is. And Wendy's going to really drive that point home today. Oral language is, as I said before, the foundation of learning to read and write. And we're going to talk about, what does that mean? What should that look like and sound like in classrooms? We also know, again, back to the whole idea that our nation is becoming increasingly more diverse, that we have to know how to engage and motivate both culturally and linguistically diverse learners. And that is something that we all have to be focused on, I think, very, very carefully and acutely. And lastly, we need to know how to identify risk factors. And I mentioned before, we have amazing research that's happening as we speak about how to identify children at risk as early as 2 and 3 years old. We know, right? I have 3 grandchildren. I have had the pleasure of watching in a different way than I did with my children, the language development and what maybe potential red flags might be for them. So we need everyone to be aware of those risk factors. And so I want to shift now from the what, right? What is the science of reading, to the how. How do we, Literacy How, and anyone who is in this business of making sure teachers learn this content, how do we approach that? What do we think is a good way to impart what we consider to be extremely complex and just multifaceted information? And so we always start with a simple view of reading. This is a simple concept, but it does not imply that teaching reading is simple. By no means is that the message we want to convey, but it's an important concept because it basically says that reading comprehension, as noted here in this little picture of a little boy reading a book about an elephant, one has to do with being able to understand listening, right, or comprehension at an oral level, at a spoken level. So listening to a book being read, watching a movie, and taking that information in and being able to understand it. And the other side of the equation is being able to lift the words off the page, decode them, right? Recognize them instantly. And we have a multiplication sign here because they're highly correlated. If this is 1, but this is 0, we're going to have reading comprehension that's 0. And conversely, if this is 0 and comprehension is a big problem for the child, but they can decode those words beautifully, we're still going to have poor or weak reading comprehension. So that's a simple view. The rope that you see here, many of you are probably familiar with it, just makes kind of the case and expands that notion of how important these two components are and how we can sort of break those down in a way. And when I say break them down, let me take a minute to do that. So at the top of the rope, you see language comprehension. There's your LC that I just talked about for the simple view. And language comprehension actually has several strands listed here. Language comprehension requires a child or student, or anyone for that matter, to have a background knowledge about what they're reading about. That's certainly going to contribute to strong comprehension. They also have to know what the words mean. And this is all at a listening level. So when they're listening to a story, if they don't know some of those words, that will impact their ability to understand what the story is about. They also have to understand the syntax of the story. And syntax really refers to how the sentences work. Sentences vary in stories and in text. Some are simple, some are complex, some are short, some are long, right? So being able to understand all types of sentences is going to matter in the end. They also have to have very good inferencing, verbal reasoning skills, and that is something that is absolutely implicit in all comprehension. And some children seem to come into the world being able to inference, and other children struggle with it. And so if the child is struggling with that, we have to know that, and we have to scaffold for them and figure out how to support that ability. And then for learning how to read, if they've been read to a lot and they know different genres and how different text structures work, that will contribute also to their ability to understand language. So this language comprehension is really a higher order set of skills that require what we refer to as metacognition, really being able to think while you're listening to something, whether it's a set of directions that somebody's giving you or a complex text. You have to be thinking as you're listening. You see the word strategic, right, is just being able to apply strategies. The bottom of the rope here is where your D comes into play. We're not going to talk about that today very much, but decoding is obviously incredibly important. It's really about being automatic. It's really all about automaticity and doing something very quickly. So you're so good at that, you don't have to worry about it anymore. You can put all your cognitive energy into doing the heavy lifting, which is the comprehension piece. But you need both of these, and you need them both in play. And that's why this picture shows how nicely these strands are separable, really, at birth, right? And they start to come together as children are learning to read. And I maintain that learning to read officially, formal reading instruction might start in kindergarten and take up through second grade for many children. Why? Because again, English is complex, and also because we have to fill in for the children who don't have those oral language experiences. We have to fill in the gap, as we referred to earlier. Now, before I turn it over to Wendy, I just want to show you the reading wheel that we put together way back when we first started doing our work in 2000, right after the reading panel came out with their wonderful report and identified 5 big ideas. Phonemic awareness was one, phonics was another, vocabulary was a third, comprehension was a fourth, and you may notice that the one big idea is missing from the wheel, and that is fluency. And again, it's not in the scope of tonight's webinar to talk about fluency and syntax, but if you want to know why we took fluency out of the reading wheel, I recommend that you listen to our webinar on syntax that we did last winter. And I think, you know, we added a couple other things. You'll see spelling here in phonics. We added morphology in with vocabulary. We added writing in with comprehension. And most importantly, for tonight's webinar, we put oral language at the core. And I am going to take this opportunity to turn it over to wonderful Wendy, and she'll tell you why we did that. So thank you, and take it away, Wendy.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Wendy North. Wonderful Wendy. Oh, I'm not so sure about that. But I got my start as a special education teacher way back in the 80s, first with preschool children who were mostly nonverbal. It was my job to get them speaking, and then moving into a resource room for children with learning disabilities, and then being trained in Orton Gillingham, where I got my start in learning about how we really teach everybody how to be a reader. And then through the 90s, I worked mostly with struggling teenagers and adults who had not learned how to read. And then Margie and I met in the late 80s, and the rest is history. We've been working together since then. So my job is to go out into the schools and deliver professional development, usually on a topic, always on a topic around our reading wheel and also oral language. And then going into classrooms, modeling lessons, and then coaching our teachers. After they've seen me model a lesson, then they will model a lesson and go from and do a lesson for all of us. So we're going to be talking about oral language as the core of literacy. And there's some good news here, because nearly all children have the capacity to learn language as they are immersed in and guide in language with other people in their environment and guided by adults. So the good news is we are all hardwired to learn language, oral language. We already have it in our brains to have that happen. So that is the good news. There's a lot of implicit learning that goes on when we think about oral language. It's not as, it does not need to be explicitly taught and systematically taught the way the other topics are around the reading wheel. So go ahead, Margie, you want to advance the slide? So here are the strands of oral language. What goes into oral language? What do we have to think about? There are some key components here. And as you'll see, the first four components mirror what is around our reading wheel. So there's phonology, which is understanding that there are individual speech sounds that make up our words. Morphology is understanding that parts of words have meaning. So think about prefixes and suffixes. Semantics refers to understanding the words in isolation and also words as they're grouped together. Syntax refers to the order of words and phrases in sentences. And discourse refers to the conversation and being able to speak on a topic beyond the sentence level. And then pragmatics is the social context of oral language. So it's knowing that we need to use eye contact, we need to maintain an appropriate distance from people when we're speaking to them. We have to know about taking turns, being a good listener. We have to know about tone of voice. We have to understand who we're talking to so we know what words we can use with them and how informal or formal we need to be while we're speaking to them. So those are the strands that go into oral language. So let's think about this for just a minute. A student that has weak oral language proficiency, it's not where it needs to be for the child's age and grade level. Their academics will suffer because of that, because children are going to use what they know about our oral language to help them understand what it means to be a reader and a writer. So they're going to be relying on their ability to use and understand oral language in order to make sense of the reading instruction and certainly the reading comprehension work that you're expecting them to do. And to keep in mind, and I think this is true for all of us, not just for students, that our receptive language is bigger, stronger, better than our expressive languages. So just to keep those couple of things in mind. I'm just smiling because I'm realizing how quickly I need to be moving through these various slides. So what we've done here around the reading wheel and also for oral language is we have developed protocols or a walk-through literacy tool for each area of that around the wheel. So this is just hang on, Margie, you just go back for 1 second. So this is just a snapshot of what a protocol would look like that you could take with you as you're walking through a classroom or doing an observation. So we have those 5 different areas there. And the idea would be is that you would use that worksheet with a particular teacher as you walk through, and then notice progress as you go through your different observations during the course of the year. Now, this is going to help you target the feedback that you give to your teachers. Thank you, Margie. So we need to be, when we go into classrooms, we need to be looking for the specifics of how teachers are building their students' foundational literacy skills. And at the same time, we also need to take a look at if they're building their students' language comprehension skills and how are they doing that. So administrators need to know how and what to observe for each of these components. So now we're going to take a look at each one of the areas that I just showed you on that worksheet. We're now going to take a look at each of those areas. So before we get started here, I want us to think about expanding oral language, blowing up the topic of oral language into all corners of the school day. And not just thinking about this as a literacy block time, but we need to look for opportunities, not only in the classroom, but all around the school where children have the opportunity to speak and have conversations with everybody in the school, not just the classroom teacher, and certainly not just during the literacy block. So how can we expand oral language opportunities into library, music, gym, history, social studies, math, snack time, any time of the day, because for a lot of children, they're going to have a lot of ground to make up. And this is also going way beyond the idea of finding different techniques for call and answer. This is not just about a teacher asking a question and finding various ways for students to be able to have a turn to speak and respond to that question. It goes way beyond that. So what we need to do is plan for and foster a learning environment which is going to maximize the oral language output of each of our students every day so that they can participate in discussions or do these things that we like to call talk tasks. So what can we do to have structured partnership talk tasks throughout a lesson? You're probably very familiar with turn and talk or the idea of think, pair, share. Purposeful partners is an added piece to that, where teachers very strategically place students in partnerships to talk to each other on a daily basis, so that in this idea of purposeful partners and turn and talk, students are turning and talking to the same student every day for perhaps several weeks before they change partners. So there's a comfort level there with the person that they're speaking to, and they're not just always talking to a different person in the classroom. Also, is there enough time for students to think and process a question or the information that has just been taught and have a moment to respond? And then an idea that I've really seen teachers grab a hold of is this idea of structured choral responses. So the teacher may ask a question about something the students have just learned, and the entire class is to answer the question, usually by a hand signal. So I put my hands on my shoulders, I would pose a question, I give students a chance to think for a moment, I drop my hands down, and the entire class is expected to answer. So this oral language output all the time, and it keeps kids very attentive as well. We need to keep in mind for our English learners, but for everybody, that sentence frames, question prompts, word banks are going to be very important. They can be posted on the room. I've seen teachers make slides that they put up on their Promethean board to establish a routine with the same types of prompts they ask every day. Okay. Oh, so this is this number 2, this idea of engaging students in familiar oral language routines. We do need to take the time to teach the pragmatic part of this. So we need to teach students how to, on a particular request, to turn to their partners, look at their partners, answer, know whose turn it is to speak first, have the exchange, and then being listening for a callback signal. So there's a routine, and we need to be very explicit about teaching our students how to talk to each other. It isn't just going to happen. And just as a little tip, as teachers are going into teaching these language routines, we are not going to ask our teachers to, or we're not going to ask our students something about content they've just learned when they're learning this routine of how to talk to each other. We want the content to be very familiar. So maybe it's about mentioning their favorite color or their snack food or their favorite time of the day as a beginning talk task as they're establishing this routine of talking to each other. Some find it's a very new concept for many students. Okay, so here we have the idea of students repeating after the teacher a word, a phrase, and playing with language by also thinking about how can we pack into all of our talk tasks or our oral language opportunities those different strands of oral language that I quickly showed you. So how can we, when we're doing a lesson on phonological awareness, make sure that our children have a lot of opportunities for talking? Morphological awareness, which is thinking about the parts of words having meaning. Syntactical awareness, and we have some activities there in the parenthesis of how can we do some sentence building activities inside of oral language activities. And then semantic awareness, an activity that we call word replacement, where we're putting synonyms in for a word, we're replacing a word in a sentence with a synonym. So just before Margie's going to show us a very quick video from one of our wonderful mentors doing a lesson with kindergarten students, I just wanted to invite you to think about this repeat after me idea as not just being something that teachers are going to do at the earlier grades, but how about third, fourth, and fifth grade when a teacher is teaching a new vocabulary word, have the students repeat that word so they have a phonological representation of what that word is. It's going to pack more of a punch than like a passive vocabulary activity. They need to be saying those new words as many times as we can get them to do that. Okay, so Margie is going to show us Elke's video. Please notice in this, it's supposed to be an activity on syntax, on how to build a simple sentence. But listen what she does to encourage as much oral language as possible, and watch how she expands her very basic sentence to something larger with these kindergarten students. Take it away, Margie.
Margie, you need to unmute, please. Sorry for the technical difficulties, everyone. We are not having trouble with the audio. I'm not sure if anyone can hear this right now, Margie, so we're gonna have to try
Oh,
again.
shoot. Shoot, you can't hear it?
No one can hear.
Huh. That's funny because I can hear it. Wendy, can you hear it?
Nope.
No,
Hmm,
maybe because of your headphones.
let's try again.
And in order to make a sentence, you have to have a who and a do. You get to choose who you want to talk about and what they're going to do. And we're going to start off with our sentence where we're going to say with a capital letter. So now say this. The frog. Good. You want to use it? Pull that over. All right, and look what you said, swims, and that's so great. Guess what I have? I have your S there because we don't say the frog swim, we say the frog swims. And then what do I have to, what do you think is on my last card? Period. All right, can you say your sentence now? Go ahead and say it.
The frog swims.
Have your students say it. You're the teacher. Say, okay, everybody say the sentence.
Okay, everybody, say the sentence. The frog swims.
Now, can you add to it for me? Can you tell me where he swims? Who could tell me where he swims?
In the pond.
In the pond?
Yeah.
Okay, let me put these out. In the
The
pond.
pond.
Good. Let's read that sentence now. Ready to go.
The frog swims in the pond.
I'm good.
Thank you, Margie. Okay, so as you saw in that, those were kindergarten students. And you are more than welcome to watch that on our YouTube channel and see the entire thing, the entire video. It's about 6 minutes long. And what she does is she is packing a ton into that one lesson. If you noticed, she was using decodable words because the children were able to read those closed syllables. So she got in some reading practice for the children. And then she was creating very simple, what we call who do sentences, which is the ground floor of learning what goes into a sentence. And then she was having them rehearse that, and not only rehearse that, but then expand it. As you notice, she used blank index cards to expand that sentence. The children were able to hang on to that phrase, and then they repeated it again. If you decide to watch it again, you'll notice that she starts showing students how we break sentences up into syntactic units. So she has them repeat that sentence over and over again with the subject, the verb, and then the prepositional phrase. And they just repeat it over and over again, and then they move along into another sentence. So think about those strands of oral language and how much she was able to accomplish in about a 20-25 minute lesson with kindergarten students. So really taking advantage of that time that she had with that small group to have them talking as much as possible, but on task with what she wanted them to do. Okay, so another thing that we need to look for here is facilitating fluent discourse between and among students to promote oral rehearsal while being sensitive to students' individual language capabilities. So this one takes time. When there is a lot for children to learn about going back and forth and having a discussion with each other, maybe just as a group of 2, but then in a group of 3 or a small group of 5 or 6. And we need to have them practice at the sentence level first, just back and forth with each other. And then we gradually build so that they understand that they can go back and forth and have a conversation with each other about a particular topic. Now, this idea of language lineups is a great one to get this idea moving. In the next video that I will be showing you, you will briefly see children in what we call a language lineup. And it's where we take the entire class, we divide them into two groups, and they stand in two rows facing each other. We give them a sentence starter, and they have to, and one side goes first, and they all look at the partner that's standing across from them, say their piece, whatever the sentence stem happens to be or frame, and then their partner across the way responds to them. And that's called a language lineup. In the video that we see, they call it a traverse line. So what we need to do here is we need to be very aware of our individual students' language capabilities. And we need to ensure that we are not overwhelming children who are not ready for lengthy oral language talk tasks. So you'll be using sentence stems, sentence frames, and at first maybe just having them fill in the blank at the end of a sentence and coming up with one word just to get them used to speaking, because a lot of children don't know or aren't often encouraged to do much talking inside the school. So sometimes it takes some coaxing for them to feel comfortable saying anything at all. Margie, okay. So this is the idea of looking for a teacher to be explicitly modeling academic language using something we call formal frames, or as some of you know, accountable talk. At the word, phrase, sentence, and then of course the discourse level. So this is where we're using more formal language, teaching children how to agree and disagree with each other politely and respectfully to carry on conversations. What I'd like to show you now is a longer video clip of a school that's in London, England, where they put a priority on oral language skills. And this is, once again, I'm going to show you probably like about a 4.5-minute clip, and you will see all kinds of things going on in this very brief amount of time, and how this school has really made it a priority, along with teaching children how to read and write, how to increase their oral language skill on a daily basis in every corner of their day. And Peter, who you will hear speaking first, is the headmaster of the school. So I'll give you a moment to read that quote, because the video moves very, very quickly, and I want you to read what he's going to be saying. And then Milo is a student, and he cuts to the chase, and he says, when people listen to me, it makes me feel respected and important. And then at the very end, you'll hear Peter once again over some classroom noise and some music that's playing, for all the reasons, the oracy is an issue of equality, equity, and social mobility. So take a look at this, and Margie, do whatever you have to do to make the sound work.
To prepare young people for the world that they're going to go into in the 21st century. I think one of the biggest barriers to the students we serve really getting on in life is lack of good communication skills. We need to elevate speaking to the same level as reading and writing.
So we have a vote. What makes me enjoy talking the most is that everybody's listening to you and you're like part of the world and you feel respected and important.
When I'm talking, they give me questions, or then maybe I give them questions.
Every child within this school is expected to speak in every lesson, in every opportunity throughout their school day. And we try and create lots of different contexts for young people to hone their skills as speakers.
So what I want us to do now is to have a discussion about different kinds of culture. And I want us to discuss this. Some cultures are better than others.
I think every teacher, if you say to them, do you talk in your classroom? Of course there's talking in the classroom, but what's different here is the deliberateness of it.
Every teacher needs to have that toolkit of things that they can draw on to bring effective talk into their practice.
We've done a lot of work introducing sentence stems that children can use for different situations. So for agreeing with somebody, for disagreeing politely with someone, for challenging someone.
And while we're doing that, I want you to make sure that you're using some of the sentence stems. So you might say linking to someone's point or build on something that somebody has said.
Building on there. I agree, because maybe
the thing that's had the biggest impact on my practice is probably discussion guidelines.
We are going to be discussing why beliefs were important or why they weren't important in ancient Greece. Could anybody remind me about any of our discussion guidelines?
one of them is when someone's not contributing, you have to invite them by asking them a question or saying their name.
Excellent. Why would you do that, Aaron?
Then everyone has an idea.
Everyone gets to share their idea, don't they? Well done.
So discussion guidelines were created in conjunction with the children. These are the 5 or 6 key things that we think make a really good discussion. I've been able to take a step back, and I think that the children take on a larger role within the classroom.
I think it should be Aries and Athena, because they're both the god of war. Yeah, but to challenge your diva, there are lots of fish.
So another key way of promoting oracy in the classroom is to think carefully about the groupings that you use. So whether you're getting them to talk in pairs or in trios or in larger groups.
Sometimes it's best to have students in threes. Sometimes we look at how they can stand in the traverse opposite each other. Each of those different groupings enables a different type of conversation.
If you see inside them, we're all human beings and we're all people.
Our oracy programme is comprehensive. It has to be seen in maths and science and those subjects that traditionally haven't had a talk focus.
There are 24 cookies altogether.
There are 24 cookies altogether.
There are 3 children.
There are 3 children.
All right, let's see if the
I would say that I'd always encouraged talk in my maths lessons before, but what's changed is that I really plan very carefully for talk, and I model and structure the talk very explicitly.
Okay, so we're going to go and do our talk task.
The talk task, they get to practice what they've done in the new learning, and they're talking through what they're doing. So it's about developing their vocabulary and language of explanation.
We were talking about fractions. We done like 4 circles, and then we needed to share 24 in each group. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Your turn. We were using sentences to help us. 24 shared equally between 4 children is equal to 6.
There are lots of different reasons why we get students who may not feel it's almost their place to speak. So for all those reasons, oracy is an issue of equality, of equity, of social mobility.
Wow, I heard some pretty amazing discussions going on just now. So let's get some feedback from.
Thank you, Margie. So in that video, you saw a lot going on, and at that school in London, they have really made it a priority to increase their oral language capabilities of their students. And by thinking about every corner of the day being used as an opportunity for children to speak and to have an opportunity to listen to their classmates. So it wouldn't, you should take a look at that again, the entire video at some point. It's called Oracy. There's a whole, it'll come up, Edutopia. And in their high school level, they actually show a video of the students debating each other. And it's just amazing how they speak to each other after all this, years of practice. Thank you, Margie. So you saw different groupings going on. You saw it being used in math, just being very intentional about talking. So providing targeted feedback, we could use those protocols and think about how you would like to use those with your teachers, and maybe just focusing on one piece at a time and helping your teachers get, get them to a starting point, and then ask them to practice one thing or one idea and see how that goes, and building from there. But we like these protocols that we've created, and administrators have found them very useful, because instead of just giving some general comments about what they saw inside of a lesson, they can really target what they want to say to their teachers. And I'm going to invite Margie to fill in or reiterate anything that you wish to. At this point, it was a quick blast through our oral language, but I guess before I let you take over there, I just want to have you all think about different ways that we can invite children to do more speaking on a daily basis, and to think about how what can we do to get them to say as many words as possible during the day, even if it has to start as a repeat after me, and all the different ways that we can do that during read alouds or during vocabulary instruction, or whatever they're working on. Margie?
Yeah, thank you so much, Wendy. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Sorry for the technical difficulties. What I would say, just to add to what Wendy described, is there is a protocol for every area of the reading wheel, because we believe so wholeheartedly that teachers' lessons have to have a focus. Every lesson should have an oral language component. That is absolutely important. As Wendy said, the oral language rehearsal will actually help them be more successful with the reading that they're going to be doing and the writing that they're going to be doing. It really will serve them well to be successful. And when we, have a focus on an area of comprehensive literacy, whether it's phonemic awareness or phonics or vocabulary, and the teachers has a clear learning objective, we also encourage them to have a clear language objective. And the administrator, should be able to walk in their classroom and know right away what their objectives are, and that targeted objective will also, as I say, guide your use of a protocol that looks much more specifically at instruction than most classroom look-fors are really oriented toward doing. And many times I've seen administrators look for engagement. We absolutely believe engagement is important, motivation, keeping kids on task. All of those things are very important. But if we want to build knowledge around the science of reading, we have to start deepening teachers' knowledge of that. And you, in turn, as administrators, the more you know, the better able you will be to provide the support that I talked about earlier. So just in closing, speaking of feedback, we love hearing yours. So if you could respond to this question in the chat box, what did you learn today that will change how you support your teachers? That would be fantastic. We'd love to hear from you. And I'm going to turn now to Kim. We actually have 6 whole minutes, which we often, or 7, whatever it is. We rarely have a lot of time at the end, but we would love to answer any questions you may have. So Kim, if you want to convey some of those to us.
Sure, thank you. Great job, Margie, and Wendy, thank you for all of your wisdom. I had a earlier submitted question about where can I learn more about the science of reading? If you could give some references for some people, that would be awesome.
Sure, I think there's lots of great places to go, that's for sure. If you want to find a lot of information in one place, I recommend going to literacyhow.org, because we do have quite a lot of information there. The Reading League is a great place to go, and you can join for free. We happen to have a chapter in our state of Connecticut, but many of you are tuning in from other states. There are chapters in, I think, 10 states now, and they are a great source of information. There's so many great, Reading Rockets always has fantastic information around the science of reading. The International Dyslexia Association also is a great place to look for specifically dyslexia and reading disabilities, but I think they also have good information in general. Wendy, do you have some favorites that you want to share with our participants?
I think you about covered that. Very nice.
All right.
Another question is someone's inquiring about the, the walkthrough protocols. Is that something you can share, or how do you access those?
If you would like to have a copy, just email me, and the email address is right here. So I'd be happy to share. We want them widely used. So thank you for asking.
Another question is about programs, and do you recommend a specific program for teaching reading?
That's a question that we're often asked, particularly by administrators. And what I usually say in response to that is we're somewhat agnostic, because if I thought there was a perfect reading program out there, I would be happy to broadcast it. But the fact of the matter is there's no one program that works for all children. And that's why we at Literacy How believe in empowering teachers with knowledge. That's going to make the biggest difference. There are good programs. There are programs that are not based on the science. And so you, the administrator, really have to be an informed consumer. There are great places to look for vetted programs, and you just really have to do your homework, I think is the best thing I can tell you. Do your homework, learn about the science of reading, and you'll then be able to see how does that program incorporate the evidence-based practices that are so important. And do your own research, because a lot of people go to their colleagues and say, what do you use? How do you like it? It's not about how you like it. You know, look at your data. Is it working for your students? If you have less than 95%, you're not hitting the high mark and the high expectation we believe you should have for your students. So, and it's not one program either, because think about tiers of instruction. I think what I will say, and this is an important point to leave you with, when we think about our tiers of instruction, and our core program has to be extremely strong and hit all the components that I talked about on the reading wheel, and especially build in time for oral language. We also want to think about tier 2 and tier 3 and special education. So often I see schools and districts having programs that are not aligned at all. And the children who need the most consistency in terms of programmatic information, language used, and instructional language used, often hear one thing in tier 1 and something different in tier 2 or in special education. I highly recommend that you make sure that all of your programming is aligned to the science of reading. That will go a long way to support, especially the children that have the largest gaps.
Thank you, Margie. One last question. One attendee wrote in that they have a great instructional coach that's very knowledgeable in the science of reading. And as an administrator that's new to the science of reading, how can they best support her?
I think the best way they can support her is to make sure she knows how to coach. A lot of times, I know that sounds pretty basic and obvious, but a lot of times people have those positions and they don't have the background knowledge about coaching adult learners. So that would be one thing I would make sure. And I would follow that person around. If that person really does know the science of reading well, that would be a perfect person to shadow, as whether it's a he or she goes into classrooms. And we often have use our protocols as a teaching tool that we can use with principals who say, oh, you know what, I don't know how to look for certain things, and we can use that as a way to calibrate their knowledge and make sure that we're seeing the same things in that classroom instruction. So I hope that answered the question. I know we are right at the top of the hour. I am so glad that you tuned in. And for those who, well, you'll all get the recording, and please join us, sign up for our newsletter, and we look forward to seeing you again when we have our next webinar. And thank you, Wendy.
Thank you, Margie.